Hello everyone and welcome back to Social Media Law and Risk Management. We're into your second module now, and this is the first lecture of the second module, looking at social media and defamation. Well, defamation is one of the biggest areas of social media law, and we could stand here for weeks talking about it. In fact, anyone going through law school does a whole course in torts, of which defamation is a part, so it can actually take up a lot of time. But we only have our few minutes today, so we'll just be touching on some of the key points from Chapter 2 of your textbook, Cyber Libel and Reputational Damage Online. Well, what are we going to cover today? We're going to look at your learning problem, a new learning problem, so we'll talk through that. We'll define defamation and what its ingredients are. We'll look at criminal versus civil defamation very briefly, who can and can't be sued, special considerations of defamation for social media, some of the key defences that apply internationally, and international comparisons between the Commonwealth, the United States, Europe and Asia. You'll notice this theme coming through the course and through the textbook. Although this course is taught from Australia, we don't just talk about Australian law. In fact, if you are coming from a different country, even from Australia, you'll need to go into much more detail in a local textbook about the laws as they apply in your own country. Well, first, let's see our learning problem. And I think you'll see both defamation and our next topic arising here. The fake hotel reviews. We've seen some pretty scathing ones as we travel. You are the public relations manager at a successful 4-star hotel called Dolphin Delight in the thriving coastal tourist city of Lobster Cove. You return from a week's leave to find a memo to phone the general manager who's received some complaints about some reviews posted to a site called True Blue Reviews, famous for its frank ratings of hotels and motels. 3 of the reviews have been posted within the last few hours, and read as follows. Fisherman's Lodge, rating 1 out of 10. The staff are so unfriendly, we thought we were staying at Faulty Towers. Bathroom plumbing is hanging out of the wall and the toilet hasn't been scrubbed in weeks. Bed bugs are big enough to use for bait. Our advice, dodge the lodge. From Steve and Penny Doltrone in Port Lincoln, Australia. Tranquility Towers, rating 2 out of 10. No wonder this place is called Tranquility Towers. Hardly anyone seems to want to stay here. You can't get breakfast here until after 10 a.m. and it tastes like it was prepared at 6 a.m. All we got when we complained was a shrug and a scowl. The toilet cistern leaked noisily all night and nobody came to repair it when we asked. Avoid it like the plague. In fact, one might start, a plague that is, in its mouldy bathrooms. Liana and Renee Cohen from Toronto, Canada. There's also a glowing review of your own establishment. Dolphin Delight, rating 10 out of 10. The name says it all. It is sheer delight for anyone wanting to enjoy the delights of Dolphin Bay. Smiling staff, sparkling amenities, and a welcoming hibiscus flower on the starched white linen. Home away from home, just metres from pristine waters. Doris Parchley, Suffolk, United Kingdom. So you make some quick inquiries and discover all 3 comments were posted from the same computer IP address in, you guessed it, Lobster Cove. In fact, they seem to have emanated from your very office. Your assistant manager is a recent graduate of a poorly regarded tourism college. And when you challenge her on this, she proudly admits she has concocted the fake reviews. Well, I think we've all suspected that in our own travel sites. We won't go through all of our learning problem questions. They're the same each time. But I think you'll start to see a few issues of media law arising there. And I'd like you to work systematically through each of those questions. And don't forget stakeholder theory. Who are the stakeholders here? And how might a social media policy take account of the stakeholders to address this sort of behaviour? Well, let's now define defamation and its ingredients. Well, defamation is the legal term for damage to somebody's reputation. Material the defendant has published to at least a third person that has lowered the plaintiff, the person bringing the action, lowered their reputation in the eyes of other citizens. So defamation's all about what's called a defamatory meaning, an imputation, a defamatory meaning that lowers someone in the estimation of other people in society. And it can cover any kind of statement that damages somebody's character. And we all know the sorts of things, whether someone is faithful to someone else, whether they're loyal in the workplace, whether they're honest, whether they're competent, good at the job or what they claim to do, whether they're a hypocrite, perhaps they don't practice what they preach, whether they're corrupt, a murderer, a thief, all of these sorts of things. It can be spoken, which in some places, not in Australia, but in some other places is called slander, or written in a permanent form, which in some places is called libel, not in Australia. In Australia some years ago they were collapsed together into a single term, defamation. Criminal versus civil defamation. Well, defamation is normally pursued as a lawsuit, known as a tort or a civil wrong. And it's where a plaintiff is seeking damages and they sue another citizen or a company for an award of damages against them. Sometimes though they go to court to win an injunction, a court order stopping something being published. Now, an example that sings out from your textbook is the one involving Courtney Love and the fashion designer, a woman by the name of Simaraganka. Now, Courtney Love, for whatever reason, but in the early hours of the morning, when she was being quite verbal on her social media, she wrote all sorts of nasty things about this young and upcoming fashion designer. When you looked at those things I just mentioned in defamation, she probably touched upon most of those things about this young woman. And it turns out it was all because the woman had she had commissioned some dresses, some designs. Courtney Love had commissioned them from the fashion designer, who had duly done them, and then had the hide to send Courtney Love an account for her work. Courtney Love perhaps expected this to be free. It all finished up as a $430,000 defamation settlement in the United States, where it's actually very hard to win a defamation action. So it was pretty blatant defamatory behaviour. Interestingly, I think I mentioned it in the book, Courtney Love then had a go at her lawyers publicly, and they then sued her and won defamation case. So I don't think celebrities, late nights and social media go very well together, or at least they didn't in the Courtney Love case. We can also have criminal defamation, where the police can come and actually charge you for defamation in some places. This doesn't apply everywhere. It still exists in Australia, and it's sad in some ways because it can be misused in some countries as a political tool. But it's where your defamation is so bad against somebody that it is just pretty much just destroys them and their careers and their lives. And it's rarely pursued in Australia, but it sits there on the books. Well, who can and can't sue and be sued? Any natural person, that's you and me, can sue in most places. In Australia, we've had people as young as a 9-year-old suing for defamation. That was in New South Wales some years ago. In some places, companies can also sue for defamation, although not in Australia anymore, at least not larger companies. And government agencies in some places, or governments can sue, but not in Australia because we've had important court decisions that have prevented governments suing for defamation. Anyone responsible for the publication can be sued. Now, in broader media terms, that could be the editor or the company that's publishing the material. In social media, it's pretty clear it's normally you that's sending the tweet or the Facebook posting or the Instagram message, so it would be you that would be sued. There are some protections to stop the lawsuits against internet service providers and social media platforms, particularly in the USA, where the Communications Decency Act has a special provision that protects internet service providers and those platforms. In other countries, litigants are testing the waters and they're having some success in some places and less success in others. In Australia, in a major case over the past couple of years, Google was successfully sued over images it did not take down that associated a Melbourne man with the underworld. Platforms may be protected themselves, but a big issue we look at in the textbook is whether the platforms will in turn protect you and your identity if someone is chasing you, trying to find out your identity in order to sue you for defamation. Well, what are some special considerations for social media? Well, the same basic laws apply to your social media messages as they apply to the mainstream media when they publish a television story or a newspaper article. So it's important that you know about this and tell your friends and relatives about it as well. Are the social media defendant and the plaintiff in the same place? Are they in the same jurisdiction? Because that can be significant. I mentioned earlier the Gutnick case, where a Melbourne businessman successfully sued a New Jersey company. But it's not always easy to sue somebody in another place. So it's probably easier normally if it all happens within the same country, if not in the same state or territory. An important issue to do with social media is a retweet or a like on Facebook defamatory? Well, some court decisions throughout the world have found that it can be. And I think I mentioned a German case in the textbook where some employees like on Facebook some really nasty things said about one of their bosses on Facebook, employees at the Daimler factory, and they were enjoined in the defamation action. I don't think a retweet on Twitter will normally catch you out. The reason is that it's a medium where there are so many of these things going on that the simple retweeting is normally to a link rather than to the actual words themselves. However, if the words of the message were particularly heinous, say for example, alleging a famous person was a pedophile or a fraud, then I think even the retweet in those circumstances could be classed as defamation. So who's most likely to be pursued or enjoined in an action? Clearly anyone responsible for the publication. But most likely are those who can afford to pay out in damages. And you'll find that litigants are very, very selective because they invest a lot in their legal defamation suits, and they will normally only target people who can afford to pay for it. There are exceptions to that, of course. For example, if they want to make a point or they want to silence somebody, they might pursue defamation against them. But normally they'll be after those damages from the rich. What are our key defences to defamation? Well, they're explained in detail, but truth is a defence in most places. So if you've said something that's nasty but true, as long as you can prove that, it will be defensible. There are criteria there. Your opinion. There's no such thing as a defamatory opinion, except you're entitled to hold your opinion as long as the facts upon which you form that opinion are provable. So that's why we have very scathing reviews of restaurants and books and films and things that are out in the public domain. We are allowed to criticise them, but we need to make sure our factual base is accurate. And there are a range of other situations where your speech is protected for some reason, and the textbook explains those, particularly things you might say in court or parliament, or people might write about those institutions. Internationally, these criteria vary markedly between different systems of government, legal systems as they've applied. Commonwealth countries like Australia, the UK and Canada, they have strong similarities because they're born of the same law. The American law has been shaped markedly by the First Amendment to the US Constitution, which protects free speech and a free press. and other nations vary quite a lot according to their colonial origins and their own constitutional frameworks. Well, what are our discussion questions this week? Well, we start with, at a personal level, what are the nastiest things you've seen or heard on social media, and how, whether they might be defamatory and how they might be published or defended? Is it compatible to have defamation laws in countries with free expression? You might talk about that on the discussion board. To what extent should professional communicators be personally liable for their work statements on social media? Aren't they just agents for their employers? You'll have a view on that, I'm sure. How might defamatory social media posts contribute to a communication crisis in your organisation? What if somebody says your managing director is a fraud? What communication crisis emerges there, and how do you deal with it? And I'd like you to research the elements of the key defences to defamation in your home country, because they do vary a lot, and I'd like you to find a defamation textbook from your own country and see what the defences are that apply to you. Well, where have we been here? We've introduced you to defamation. We've stressed it's one of the key areas of the law affecting social media, and it's a source of a potential crisis in an organisation. We've also summarised its defences, albeit briefly. Where are we heading? We're moving to a consideration of how social media is handled by our court system, with a special focus on using social media in the courtroom, and about high-profile trials where you could face serious risks over your use of social media. In the meantime, get onto that discussion board and start discussing defamation and these questions, and start to float your ideas about that learning problem. And you might start taking notes for your learning journals for the module, and then start reading your next chapter, See You in Court. So I guess that's it. I'll see you in court at next week's lecture. Bye for now.